Many books claim to be great for beginners when it comes to Hermetic Kabbalah. While some deliver on that promise and others are way too complex, there's one to really stand out. Called the Chicken Kabbalah of Rabbi Wamed ben Clifford and written by none other than one Milo DuQuette, the book can be safely regarded as the best tool for mastering Kabbalah's basics. For this reason, after getting so much out of it, I decided to review it. So let me summarize its chapters and comment on my favorite wisdom gems. Introduction Confession. Before getting into its first chapter, the book tells the little story of its creation. Something the author discovers is that he can convey the Kabbalah's wisdom much more efficiently by linking it to various amusing stories and anecdotes. He finds that when presented in this manner, knowledge is far more absorbable and retainable. Distancing from the Kabbalistic Golden Age's silliness, DuQuette invents the fictitious Rabbi Wamed ben Clifford. He also becomes that character's critic and biographer. After explaining the scope of the rabbi's teachings, the book proceeds with some frequently asked questions. Also depicting the hilarious situation, accidentally birthing the title, this part answers questions like whether being a chicken Kabbalist is difficult and what you have to believe in order to become one. Okay, but what is Chicken Kabbalah? Page 7. Quote, Chicken Kabbalah is the deceptively safe-effacing term given to those aspects of Holy Hebrew Kabbalah that are of practical value to the practitioners of the Western spiritual tradition. Unquote. Assuring that anyone is free to become a Chicken Kabbalist, one Milo DuQuette explains how believing in this or that deity has little to no importance. Moreover, he affirms that all this becomes irrelevant once the Kabbalistic thought enters your mind. Also clarified is that being Jewish or knowing Hebrew isn't a must. Essential is only the familiarity with the Hebrew alphabet, its numerical correspondences, and the specific power words utilized in different exercises. Proceeding further, the same sections provide a great dose of relief regarding the proper Hebrew pronunciation. Page 10. Quote, Won't I be intimidated by serious Jewish Kabbalists and others who speak Hebrew? Hell no, you're a Chicken Kabbalist. Don't worry about it. The first liberating secret Chicken Kabbalists warn is that as far as the Kabbalah is concerned, there is no such thing as correct Hebrew pronunciation. Unquote. Clarifying that while some specific modern Hebrew tongues might have the quote-unquote correct pronunciation, no one really knows this when it comes to ancient Hebrew. This reminds me that very similar statements are also commonly regarded to the invented by John Dee in the medieval ages Enochian language. As many already know, and just like ancient Hebrew, the same is also considered an angelic language which no one really knows how exactly to pronounce. Due to all this, the rabbi gives his first couple of valuable tips, those being to never correct other Kabbalists' pronunciation and ideally avoid such people altogether. Found in the same paragraphs is also the crucial truth that the Bible's Kabbalistic texts were never intended for the general public. Instead, they were written by Kabbalists for Kabbalists. Next on the menu, the reader gets a very special segment of the book. Those are the rabbi's 10 Command-Rants and the author's commentaries on them. This begins with examining the concept that everything is part of one all-encompassing something which is mostly nothing with infinite potentiality. Indeed, here we learn that nothingness is the ultimate force and the far better reality behind all we can perceive, or, as one Milo DuQuette likes to say, wrap our midbrains around. As shared a bit later, grasping this very idea was pivotal for the author and his Kabbalistic studies. Page 18. Quote, The first thing that attracted me to the Kabbalah as a young chicken Kabbalist hatchling was the concept that everything produced out of this nothing. That made nothing the ultimate creator, not the Elohim or Jehovah or any other of the ill-tempered bullies of the Old Testament. I like the idea of brooding and inscrutable nothing behind everything in the universe. Unquote. Using this to segue into the three veils of negative existence, the author also warns that it is perfectly fine if not comprehending any of this initially. And actually, the chicken Kabbalists strive for something a bit different. Page 19. Quote, Don't worry if none of this makes any sense to you right now. It is enough to remember that realization of one is the second to last goal of all Kabbalists. The final goal is to attain the consciousness of nothing. Unquote. Following the previous, Command-Rants 3 and 4 elaborate on the maxim that there isn't time and space creation, nor heaven or earth, or at least not in the way they are commonly perceived. Instead, they aren't real, but mere illusions of the underlying principle, which is nothing. And here you'll probably ask, is there anything real? Fortunately there is, and that is yourself. However, it is important to clarify that the author doesn't mean your meat-machine body, brain, or even mind. Instead, he refers to the actual authentic self, i.e. your bornless and undying part who really doesn't need to eat nor sleep. The 4th Command-Rant reveals that our entire way of perception is pretty screwed/defected, making us sleepwalkers gambling blind. While saying that this is all because of our egos and personas likely comes first to mind, I think it could be safely said that the author equally regards the defined by Gurdjieff as Konda buffer. Page 29, quote, "It is perfectly natural for you to ask why is there evil in the world, or why do bad things happen to good people? But stop flattering yourself. You're never going to find an answer to those questions by gathering information with your sense and attempting to process that information with your brain." Unquote. Now, even that this may sound discouraging, the hope comes with the 5th Command-Rant. The same states that though unrepairable, the defect can be overcome through Qabalistic study and thought. Nevertheless, this overcoming really isn't for most people. Not for anything else, but because the vast majority would be far better off dreaming the lifelong illusion. And I believe this could be regarded as identical to deciding whether to stay in the Matrix in the cold cyberpunk movie. Overcoming our defective perception proceeds Command-Rants 6 is achieved by abusing the crap out of it. This means becoming crazier than the average Jane or Joe and surrendering to the transcendent consciousness. And though quite challenging, this is precisely what Qabalistic study and thought are designed for. The 7th Command-Rant elaborates on the notion that everything is connected. Applying to both heaven and earth, this communicates that everything is part of one giant whole, or as said in the book, page 22, quote, "We are living in a wall-to-wall universe. Everything is connected with everything else." Unquote. Explaining Hermes Trismegistus' rule of as above so below, Command-Rants 8 and 9 state that, quote, "Everything in heaven and earth is the reflection of everything else in heaven and earth." Unquote. Meaning that we also live in a mirror universe established on repeating patterns. Beginning with electrons orbiting the atomic nucleus, this extends to planets, stars, and even whole galaxies. Page 23, quote, "Everything in heaven and earth contains the pattern of everything in heaven and earth." Unquote. Developing on the previous, this 9th Command-Rant teaches that everything contains an exact blueprint of that which it reflects. As exemplified in the book, this phenomenon can be observed in the flora, fauna, and of course, the DNA. Finally, the list of Command-Rants concludes with the number 10, and the same happens to be something many will recognize from the author's lectures and online interviews. Page 24, quote, "Look hard enough at anything and you'll eventually see everything." Unquote. Likely the one to meditate on the most, Command-Rant 10 prescribes that only after achieving this difficult task, the chicken Kabbalist can get his or her well-deserved rest. The Sepher Yetzirah. Introducing one of the most sacred Kabbalistic texts, this chapter explains why the same is perfectly suitable for the lazy and pretentious. This isn't just because of its short length and intelligibility. More important, it's because it communicates two concepts fundamental to Kabbalistic wisdom. Those being the 10 Holy Sephirot diagram and the way deity created the universe. Here, the author also analyzes some segments of this ancient text. One of those is deity's nature and how, unlike what is expected, not Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh or Yehovah, but Elohim created the universe. Having a particular meaning, Elohim has two translations. The first is gods and goddesses, the second, dual-gender deity. Also discussed in the same section is something which the new Thought fans would likely be happy to learn. Namely that according to the Sepher Yetzirah, Elohim creates everything by speaking things into existence. After covering this, one Milo DuQuette segues into the Hebrew alphabet and its basics. Preparing for the included tables of correspondences, these pages unfold that the Hebrew letters are in fact concepts representing the foundation of everything. There are also the 22 paths connecting the spheres on the Tree of Life, the Hebrew alphabet. Reminding the importance of learning the Hebrew alphabet, Chapter 4 advises obtaining several reference books including Crowley 777. Then it delves into the fascinating subject of the Greek letter or number ratio phi, which actually corresponds to the Hebrew letter Yod. Holding the cosmos' basic structure, the vast is unfolded in all things growing and living. For this, and as a master mason, the author regards it as the great architect's signature sign. Next, these paragraphs brilliantly address Western society's crippling perception that A. the divine is something external outside of us humans, and B. that we are separated from nature. Considering the language of God, DuQuette provides what likely is the most memorable table of simple correspondences to each Hebrew letter. So now, you not only don't have an excuse for not remembering them, but can readily create an Anki or Quizlet deck and study wherever you go. The last is a pro tip given by the reviewer. The Ineffable Name of God and the Ark of the Covenant, bringing clearance to the Tetragrammaton and how, quote, there really is no end to its possible proper pronunciations, unquote. These paragraphs proceed with a story about a traditional ceremony. Besides hilarious, the same includes details any chicken Kabbalist would love to learn. The 4 Qabalistic worlds and the parts of the soul. Beginning with the encouraging Let's Learn Chicken Qabalah, this chapter takes us through a couple of Kabbalistic documentary scripts. Written by the Rabbi himself, those present 2 crucial concepts in a very humorous manner. Handling the 4 Kabbalistic worlds, the first conveys a wisdom gem I believe anyone can find helpful to meditate on. Page 82, quote, the more we divide the Great One, the more knowledge and understanding we uncover from the individual parts. But at the same time, we drift farther from the abstract perfection of the One, unquote. Revealing the mechanisms behind the whole process of inception of any invention or product, this part offers a coherent and fun explication of this rather puzzling matter. Next to telling that humans are made in deity's image, the second documentary discusses correspondences between the parts of the soul and the 4 Kabbalistic worlds. It also notes that our ultimate selves really don't need thinking to sustain consciousness. In fact, that's a lie told us by the ego or the ruach in Kabbalistic terms. Page 99, quote, even if you could no longer think, there still would be you, and there still would be consciousness. The ruach part of your soul, however, is incapable of grasping that subtle fact. It is unable to transcend itself to imagine self without thinking, unquote. Making a distinction between the ruach and the neshama, which is the higher consciousness and the seat of our transcendent awareness, and the self in Jungian terms, here the author answers another question baffling many people messing with this kind of stuff. Page 99, quote, are angels, demons, spirits, and other magical phenomena objective or subjective realities? Do they exist outside of us, or are they just in our heads? Unquote. The answer to this question is that they're all in one's head, yet it's just that one doesn't know how big their head is. An answer which is actually the title of another book of one Milo DuQuette. Wow magic, it's all in your head. You just have no idea how big your head is. Proceeding to the second script's final scene, the chapter debates Neshama's infiniteness and connection with forces that are beyond the ruach's comprehension. Most mysterious, this part also explains that the Kia is one's true identity and the life force itself. Then it wraps up with a memorable diagram to use for both the 4 Kabbalistic worlds and the parts of your soul. Recognizing the given in the same section example of the mother's intuition, I can skip mentioning that some of the version of one of those scripts can be found on YouTube. The video is titled Qabalah for the Rest of Us, one Milo DuQuette, full and high quality, so I suggest checking it out. The Tree of Life. After a little introduction, this chapter continues with its first portion. Called Sacred Numbers and the Creation of the Tree of Life, the same proceeds with several award-winning essays written by students of Zerubbabel Institute of Philosophical Youth, or ZIPI, discussing the fundamental role our thumbs played and continue to play for the development of our race. Essay number 1 elaborates on the maxim that humans are created in the image of Elohim. While more about our thumb's role can be found in 777, where Crowley likens it to the spirit element, the essay also touches on the significance of the Hebrew letter Yod representing the number 10. Agreeing with some of the points made by the previous regarding our thumbs and the creative process, the second essay handles 2 subjects. The first is the human's ability to speak, the second how parts of our anatomy are actually displayed in the Hebrew alphabet. Dealing with deity's self-realization, Essay 3 reveals how the once inscrutable divine unity eventually becomes 3, forming what's called the supernal triad on the tree diagram. Further tracking this process, Essay 4 explains how self-consciousness isn't the final, but merely the first stage. Once secured, that establishes momentum, triggering the creation of 2 more triads, mirroring the topmost. The same part also debates the tree structure, some of the symbolism of its pillars, and the order of its 3 triads. Lastly, it concludes by hinting that there is a connection between the tree's 22 paths and the same number of Hebrew letters. Kabbalistic magic and the Tree of Life. Something to likely feel is that everything previously written more or less preps for this and the last chapters. One of my favorites, this starts with the wholehearted encouragement to work with spirits. Its first section answers the most critical questions regarding the matter. It does that with an excerpt from a letter concerning Goetic spirits evocation. Fitting in 3 pages, these are several questions many people happen to consider somewhat regularly. Pages 130 and 134. Quote, "Are spirits good or evil? Yes, the spirits are good or evil, the same way electricity is both good and evil depending upon how it's directed. Are spirits real or just imaginary? The spirits are both real and imaginary, but most of us do not realize how real our imagination is. Can spirits hurt me? Yes, most definitely. Spirits can hurt you. They hurt you all of the time. Why on earth would anyone want to have anything to do with such awful and terrible entities? Because until you master these spiritual forces and consciously direct their unimaginable power to more constructive projects, their wild energies will continue to gush like burning drano through your soul along every avenue of least resistance, large or small. Gods, archangels, angels, spirits, intelligences and demons are personifications of all our abilities and potential abilities, a wondrous hierarchy of consciousness that represents the subdivisions of our own soul." Unquote. Being a tech head wannabe and having a lifestyle influenced by the biohacking culture, I interpret this in the following manner. That seeing our souls as the baddest, most powerful computers. Mighty as they are, these computers have programs and apps for anything and everything. That said, it's up to us to become familiar with and utilize those apps properly. The less we do that, the more they malfunction, causing issues and possibly messing up our lives. But on the other hand, the more we achieve it, the more we actualize our full potential. Chicken Taro and the Tree of Life. Debating the 3 veils of negative existence, these paragraphs continue by clarifying the holy Sephiroth's function as levels of consciousness. More importantly, the section addresses Taro's significance in the Western spiritual tradition and how learning it appears the fastest way to understanding Kabbalah. Question. Let's start by asking why an authority on Hebrew Kabbalah, such as yourself, would be interested in tarot cards. Answer. Because working with the tarot is the fastest way I know of learning Kabbalistic fundamentals and one of the most practical things one can do with Kabbalah. Whether we realize it or not, when we work with the tarot, we are working with the Kabbalah. Tarot is like the DNA of the Kabbalah. Better than that, it's actually the picture book of the Kabbalah. Unquote. Discussing how technically the full contains all cards, here the author shows the best grouping of your deck. Already known to most people, that's dividing them into greater and lesser arcana. He also definitely points the connection between the 22 trumps and the 22 Hebrew letters. And then he dives into the simple correspondences between the letters, the cards, the elements, the planets of the ancients and the zodiacal signs. While planetary trumps represent metals and body parts, and the zodiacal ascribe to times of the year, plants, animals, stones, etc., the elementals symbolize the mechanisms holding the entire universe. Why is this so important and what it has to do with practicality, you may ask? Well, quite a lot actually. The more of these meanings and correspondences your mind readily operates with, the more information you get whenever doing a spread. And also the more you start understanding all of the rites and techniques you perform on a day-to-day basis. Plus, as written elsewhere in the book, studying this knowledge will turn you into a more attractive and well-rounded person in such a unique manner. In this section we also find that while slicing the full card on 22 gives the trumps, by dividing it into 4 we get the 4 aces, inside of which we find 4 court and 9 small cards. Wonder why there are 4 aces and 4 suits in the tarot? Well, the answer comes straight out of the most fundamental doctrine in Hebrew mysticism. That's the 4-letter god name Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, or the Tetragrammaton. In Kabbalah, the absolute deity is too abstract to think about. Due to this, the ancients came up with the idea of chopping it into pieces and meditating on them. 4 in number, those pieces represent the 4 Kabbalistic worlds or realms of existence that are layers or frequencies of divine consciousness. The first is the archetypal or Atzilut, the second is the creative called Braya, the third is the formative called Yetzirah, and the fourth is Asaya or Asya, the material. You can think of them as deities' will, heart, mind and flesh. What happens when you divide the 56 lesser arcana into 4 stacks, one for wands, one for cups, one for swords, and another for pentacles or discs, is that you get a fourfold universe laid in front of you. Besides the tetragrammaton and the deity's parts, this also corresponds to the divisions of your soul, each representing a particular element. Along with noting this, the book elegantly addresses one of the very first things any practitioner should learn and begin living with, namely that the elements encompass infinitely more than their physical representations. For instance, besides combustion and flame, the fire element also represents aggression, initiative, passion, sex, discipline, willpower, and, as written in the book, Tabasco sauce, meaning that besides their expression in the material world, the elements are sets of laws, characteristics, and principles omnipresent in the universe. Guided by the fifth element spirit, which represents both lesser and greater arcana, combinations of them operate behind everything you see and imagine. Quote, "Spirit enables the elements to stick together the same way atoms bond together from molecules. At the same time, this magical element spirit serves to separate the individual elements just enough so that each tiny unit of fire, water, air, and earth maintains its elemental identity. If spirit didn't exist, the 4 elements would just smash together, turning the universe into mush." Unquote. After providing what I feel is the best explication of Taro's elemental, zodiacal, and planetary hierarchy, and why the princesses and the earth element are treated differently from the other court cards, which, by the way, you can also learn from a YouTube video titled "The Tot Tarot won Milo DuQuette," the book transitions to what likely is the most crucial thing in any practitioner's path: the union with the Holy Guardian Angel. Although much about that is said in other books, One Milo DuQuette's practical instructions once more stand out. Page 172, quote, "Question: How do we achieve union with our Holy Guardian Angel? Answer: You do it by using your imagination to create a deity in the image of your most ideal lover and then surrendering completely and unconditionally." Unquote. Reminding me of the devotional practice outlined in regard is the 1-year manual. This section unfolds that there are absolutely no limitations to the symbol or object of your devotion. Everything and anything could be perfectly suitable to be the focus of your love for the angel. Based on personal experience, I dare to add that having a muse certainly has an edge. The same you can perceive as an instrument through which your angel speaks to you. While this is something you can learn more about from the Living Telemas segment on the AGA, here I'll make another suggestion, mainly to the otakus, weebs, and other anime connoisseurs. That's to dig deep in their minds and preferences and develop a quote-unquote ideal combination of their biggest waifus, or husbandos. And once they do, to also perceive that character as some of a visual expression of their AGA. Adding more understanding to the 10 Command-Rants and unveiling hidden messages from the Book of Ezekiel, this chapter introduces the methods of Gematria, Notarikon, and Temura. It also teaches a couple of fundamental lessons. The first is that the divine really doesn't speak solely via quote-unquote holy texts. Instead, it does that through all sorts of messages we get in our day-to-day life. The second lesson is that by learning Qabalah, we become suitable to find encoded divine messages in everything, and more importantly, to figure out the exact meanings we need in a particular moment. Page 184, quote, "Right now, right where you are, God is talking to you from the pages of the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, from the funny papers, billboards, street signs, ticket stubs, and automobile license plates." Unquote. Page 186, quote, "The Qabalah doesn't enable me to merely interpret what somebody else meant to say. It forces me to hear what I need to hear. Each time I make another connection on paper, I'm creating a new connection in my head, or perhaps reattaching a connection that was disconnected from the heads of our ancestors vast ages ago. And I'm one step nearer to the realization that everything in heaven and earth is connected to everything in heaven and earth." Unquote. After all that, the book touches on some misinterpretations of holy names. It also explains that it really is the chain of thoughts an interpretation evokes to be most important. Then it provides instructions on using magic squares and creating sigils in them. In the same chapter you will find how by employing the method of Temura and replacing letters you can actually discover that everything has the potentiality to be everything else. Thank God I didn't know about that when messing with psilocybin and other psychoactive substances in my teenage years. Frankly, I'd likely do them even more just to tinker with that stuff for days, possibly not leaving the house. I guess some people are right when they say that you really need certain level of maturity before start learning the Kabbalah. Final words. They say the great spiritual teacher is recognized by his smile. A perfect example of that, one Milo DuQuette shows that spiritual experience doesn't have to be boring. Instead, it can be joyous, and great truths can be conveyed and apprehended with the aid of laughter. To me, the Chicken Kabbalah is the most readily digestible introduction to Hermetic Kabbalah a modern person can have. Packing tons of information you can readily apply and put into various study apps, the book helps to understand complex subjects and other rather puzzling classics like Regardie's Garden of Pomegranates, Crowley's 777 and the Unfortunate's Mystical Kabbalah. For this, I consider it a classic and an absolute must for the modern practitioner. So just in case you haven't done that already, go grab your copy of the book and find exactly why it deserves all of its positive reviews on Amazon. Thank you for your time.